Welcome to the main basketball rankings podcast. I am your host, basketball data nerd Lucas McNelly. We're doing things a little different today. We're going to do a football preview. I've got Andrew Hart from mainhighschoolfootball.com. He's going to get you up to speed, tell you everything you need to know. If you're not familiar with this site, it's absolutely fantastic. It puts the MPA site to shame. Everything you would ever want to possibly know. If you want to know the concession stands at the Wells Field, I think that's in there. Grass, turf, day, night, everything you need. Accurate schedules, far more accurate than the MPA site. So if you're not already using that site for your football needs, that is the place to go. He's going to be here in a minute. So the football model is up and running. It's going to start from last year's final rankings. If you remember last year's final rankings, they're going to be a little bit different because I found a tweak where basically the model was punishing teams for getting blown out in the playoffs, and it was theoretically better to lose in the previous round than to go and get wiped out in the next round of the playoffs. So I made an adjustment there, and it's shuffled a bunch of people. It looks much more realistic now. The football model is a little more of a work in progress than the basketball one is because this is pretty new, and getting it up to speed and finding quirks like that, or the other quirk of it was treating a 3-0 game the same as a 48-0 game because of the dividing by zero. So I think I've got that sorted out too. We'll see. Just like basketball, feel free to yell at me for it's clearly biased against your team, as we all know. Also, we're going to have soccer and field hockey rankings like last year. I actually went to a preseason field hockey game the other day at Mount Ararat, and parents were yelling at the opposing players and calling a player a bitch. And so if you're the sort of parent who goes to a high school sporting event and decides to use that sort of language in the direction of a high school student, maybe rethink your life choices, is all I'm saying, because it's not that important. And even if it was that important, what are you doing? Like, come on, man. Um, Parents. So, I think just the thing to remember is we're all just trying to have fun. It's not life and death. It's preseason field hockey. So grow up. Okay. Got that off my chest. It was very gross to sit there and listen to. Um, so yeah, Andrew Hart is here. We're going to talk to him. He's going to get you all caught up on football. If you are a subscriber, the type of subscriber who pauses your subscription during the summer, now's the time to turn it back on. The football rankings and the football picks will be behind the paywall. So if you want to know how much MDI is favored or not favored by in week 4, that's the way you're going to need. That's what you'll need. And really, it helps keep the site going. It helps make it possible for me to do stuff like this. And yeah, and it's alternate media, and we have these digital things that are fun, and then I can do more podcasts and more stuff like that. So without further ado, let's go to my conversation with Andrew Hart of mainhighschoolfootball.com. Okay, my guest today is Andrew Hart from the indispensable mainhighschoolfootball.com. Really an overwhelmingly great resource for high school football, including the Facebook page that has something like 12,000 people on it. Andrew, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Lucas.
So I wanted to have you on because now I do football, and who better than you to preview the football season because you're on the ground, you know everything that's happening, and I don't. So I figured I would pick your brain, and we turn into content, and everybody's a winner.
That's what I love to hear.
All right, so let's start. Let's start right at the top. Leavitt. I have a couple Leavitt questions. First of all, one. Let's start with this. Have you seen the run they had last year? Like, the fact that they were a C school even playing A schools, which in basketball just doesn't happen. Like, Trape would play Noble every so often, and that was it. And you wouldn't see anything else like it. So have you ever seen a dominant run like that where they just went and they just demolished these A schools?
Not by a lower level school. Over the past couple of years, one of the things the football committee, the scheduling subcommittee wanted to do was to try to make things a little bit more equitable, both for um, teams kind of towards the bottom of the standings, I guess you could say, teams that are still kind of working together to get a good program off the ground, and then you've got these really strong smaller schools that are willing to punch up their weight. And back in the day, you go back 5, 10 years, that sort of thing just never happened. The reliance on the schedule was always, hey, we're going to do a round robin schedule within our class. You're going to play you're going to play 8, 9 games against everybody. You're going to knock them out, knock them up, and eventually you're just going to move on. And then, hey, guess what? You're going to see the opposing team from the other region at state championship, and that's about it. And the problem was, it wasn't really viewed as the best schedule, I guess, at the end of the day, for the folks at the top to try to get them a tougher opponent, and then for the folks at the bottom who were getting beat by 45, 50, 55, 60 points, and that's not really helping anything either. So what I think the smartest thing that the football committee kind of did was to sit down and say, let's try to get the regions, let's try to get the athletic associations, conferences to try to work out some of these little kinks in the scheduling, try to open things up, try to make it a little bit easier to have some of these scheduling matches that just absolutely never happened. If you go back, I forget, I think it was about 5 years ago, the very first dream matchup we ever saw out of class was when Thornton Academy, the Class A champion, took on Marshwood, the Class B champion. And it was one of the most anticipated football matchups you had ever seen. It was very close at the end, and it proved that just because you've got Class A against B doesn't mean that you can automatically ring up Class A and say, hey, bigger school, they're automatically going to win.
Why do you think it is that they're more willing to accept the idea that enrollment is not the be all end all of athletic success in football than they are in basketball when it takes a lot more enrollment to put together a football team than it does a basketball team?
Because when you sit there and you look at the makeup of a team, oftentimes football is the largest rostered sport you're going to find of anything within the MPA, athletics across the country in general. It's just the way it is.
Right.
And because of that, you're going to have a great disparity from one school to the next in terms of how many kids they can get within their program, how many quality athletes you're going to get. And unlike most other sports, with maybe the exception of baseball, you don't have such a specialization as was needed in football. You've got a line where you're going to need one's type of athletic body. You've got your receivers, tight ends, which is going to have another skill set. You're going to have your quarterback, vastly different skill set. You're going to have your different wide receivers, and that's just on the offensive side of the ball. But never mind going over to the defensive side of things, where you've got your linemen, linebackers, cornerback, safeties, all these other sort of things. So it's unique, and it creates these sort of situations where not every school has that opportunity to, doesn't have the type of athletes that come out. Not everybody has the numbers that you can get. Some communities are great at pushing out football players, others not so much. Not exact it's not a downplay on those communities. It's just, the reality of it. And you've got 79 different communities, 79 different places and where they're at in terms of football coming into the season.
Is part of it that also, if you look at a region and you look at a basketball region, you got 15, 16, maybe 21 schools in it. And then you look at a football region, you got six. And then, you're like, well, I mean, geez, who else are we going to play?
Sometimes, yes. Obviously, Southern Maine, it's a lot easier to schedule those sort of games because between York and Cumberland County, you've got, I believe, at least 25, 30 different schools somewhere in there that have that option that can, play against multiple different classes or multiple different situations. Then it becomes a little bit more difficult. For instance, if you get, you go up along, towards the mid coast, you're running into either Booth Bay, Madomic Valley, Camden Hills, Oceanside, Belfast up to Bucksport. You don't really have that option. one of the nicer things that I've noticed, at least over the past couple of years, is schools are showing a lot more interest in opening up the travel schedule. Case in point, this year when I put together my cool department tracker, kind of looking at the scheduling and the mileage that's driven, it was unique to see that Spruce Mountain of Livermore Falls is taking a trip all the way up to I'm not sure if it's Fort Kent or Madawaska for one
Jeez.
of their games. And that one was done purely because it was a competitive need. Um, Spruce Mountain struggled mightily last year. Valley, they're still trying to find their footing, and by Valley I mean the tri co-op of Fort Kent, Madawaska, and St. Agatha or Wisdom. I mean, so for that, that's a 600 some mile round trip for them. So obviously, it's nice to see these schools willing to put in that sort of travel, not just saying, well, accept what it is and go from there.
And Spruce went to Caribou, I think it was this summer. It was either Caribou or Presque Isle for a summer tournament.
That's
So
some crazy travel if you think about it, too.
it's
I
a
mean,
lot of travel.
it's amazing from where we're at, from where I'm at near Portland to go from here down to Bridgeport has the same amount of distance as going from here up to Madawaska, which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah, one of these years I want to make a thing. It's just too much legwork of how many miles each school drives, but it's one of those things where I can't figure out how to automate it, and I really don't want to do it by hand. Like go into Google Maps and like do it all.
Especially where football has, what is it, 140? Well, that's boy. I'm thinking of just on one side. Then you've got the girls' side as well. That's about what,
Right.
200 and 260, 270 some
It's
teams,
a
maybe even more.
hundred. It's 130 schools on each side, depending on who can put a team together in a given year. I think it's the high is 135 since I started.
So yeah, that's a lot of work to come up with that.
And
Fortunately for me,
a
when I
lot of
just
games.
yeah, and I was just able to punch in what I could, and I've only got to deal with 79 schools over usually a 4 game regular season. Never
Sus,
mind
yeah.
basketball.
So the other question I had about Leavitt is, can they three-peat? I mean, I'm guessing they're coming back to the pack at least a little, but that's quite a juggernaut of a program up there.
It is. Mike Hathaway has done an amazing job. He's got a great community buy-in. He's got a great feeder base, and that's what you notice. Some of these perennial teams, it's not that they just have concentrated athletes that come up. It's that they have the community resources that come in there. The parents, families, administrators that are willing to support them. They've got the youth programs that help encourage kids to come out and say, "Hey, football isn't just something you watch on Saturdays and Sundays. This is something you can do right in our backyard up in Turner." And, it's great what you see, and hopefully it's something that can last. And I think it should, because you've seen they've been on a run going back to the time they four-peated back to the state championships back in the 20 teens. And there's no reason to think they couldn't do it right now. If you look at Southern Class C, it's the smallest region in the state, which personal opinion on that aside, if you look at who's coming in, Cheverus made the move up to Southern B. You've got Brunswick making the move from 11 or 8-man up to Southern Class C as they're rebuilding their program. You've got Freiburg Academy. You've got York as well. I guess York is, from what I've heard, York is kind of on the rebound this year. So it could be a far harder challenge than Leavitt dealt with last year or the year before.
So less of a cakewalk. Then not a
Um,
cakewalk is I don't a cakewalk's the wrong word because they were just so much better than anybody. I don't think it mattered really, their strength of schedule necessarily.
Yeah, other than the regional final game against Freiburg Academy, which was one of the best challenges I think they've had in some time, going back to their series against Cape Elizabeth a couple of years ago. I think this year we'll see them kind of being tested in ways that maybe they weren't tested the last couple of years because of the sheer volume of talent, quality that they had top to bottom.
Now I haven't looked at their schedule yet, so this is a dumb question, but are they playing this same schedule where they go play TA and A schools, or have they scaled
No,
it back a little bit?
They scaled it back a little bit. I'm bringing it up on my website. If you don't mind, if I can throw out a shameless plug out there,
Go
www.mainhighschoolfootball.com.
plug
And one
away.
of the things schedules got is they're going to be opening up this weekend, this Friday, playing against Winthrop. That's a program that I've been told is really on the rebound. They could be one of those top contenders in Class D.
Okay.
After that, Leavitt's going to move into their division or their regional schedules. They've got Brunswick at home, and then they'll travel out. They'll play Deering and Portland, and then they've got 2 home games against Coney and Freiburg. They will have a Class A game, and that's going to be up against Scarborough in week 7.
Okay. So less of we realize we're way better than everybody else, and we got to challenge ourselves of a schedule, more of a normal schedule for them this year.
It certainly seems that way. I think that Leavitt's one of those schools. I don't think that they would really feel intimidated by going up against the creme de la creme of the rest of the state. I get that genuine impression from Mike
Mm-hmm.
Hathaway as the coach, from his AD, from his staff, that they don't view it as any they don't view it as something that they would rather not deal with. They seem very much like the sort of program that wants to go out and challenge the best. The Ric Flair adage: to be the man, you got to beat the man.
You almost wonder if some of these A schools went, yeah, do we want to do this? Like it's not a great look to get beaten by a school like that much smaller than you.
Perhaps not, but at the same time, I'd like to think most of these programs have that same sort of adage. They don't
Right.
view it so much as being beaten by a lower class team, more as they were beaten or going to beat one of the better ones that they can play against. Obviously, the big difference between football, most other team sports in Maine, is football utilizes Crabtree rankings. Crabtree is not based on the class that a team is in when it gets its wins, unlike heel points, which does factor in what class a team was in when they with that victory. Granted, wins play a part in that, but that's kind of a minor detail. In Crabtree, it's really more about the wins that you've got when you're playing an opponent, combined with your own winning percentage. So I think for a lot of these schools, if they can get that sort of quality opposing team to play against, even if they lose, plenty of good takeaways saying, there's nothing wrong with losing to a team that they may have lost to. Just like I'd like to think it works that same way. There's no shame in losing to Leavitt, especially if it was a very competitive game. I look at last year's game between Leavitt and Oxford Hills. Hell of a match. Hell of a game.
Oh
It
yeah.
was, it was a great game to watch, kind of going down to that last quarter. Last quarter. So that was going to be one of those things where it's like, hey, we lost, but we held a really good team, probably one of the best in the state, to within a touchdown. Who else can say that?
Yeah, and one of the quirks of the Crabtree, if I understand the Crabtree correctly, is that it could be more valuable to you to lose to Levitt, to a team that goes undefeated, than it is to beat a team that maybe won 2 games. Because it's part of the calculation, right? Is the winning percentage of the teams you play, regardless of whether or not you beat them.
I've always looked at it, the Crabtree is really kind of a two-part thing, and 2/3 of your quality points is usually going to come from your own record, and a third of it's going to come in from your opposing teams. So a team losing to a team and them picking up the win may not necessarily help as much as your team itself winning.
Okay.
Obviously, you don't want to be playing nothing but a cream puff schedule. I've seen countless schedules over the years where a team did very poorly, and not poorly by choice, but they just played a tough schedule. But they had a rewarding Crabtree ranking that helped them because they played the tough schedule. Consequently, I've also seen other teams that have had strong schedules, but they don't play a lot of opposing quality opposing teams. And you see it in the Crabtree where you've got a team that is 5-3, 6-2, maybe even 7-1 that's not holding that top spot. And of course, that always brings in the complaints from the general public saying, well, how can that possibly happen? How can a team with 7 wins be ranked below a team with 6 or 5? Well, it's quality of play. Thornton Academy was a good example. Thornton Academy starts off last year with 2 losses, slowly built it back. They had one of their worst records going 5-3, but they were still ranked first over Noble. If I remember right, I think Noble came in ranked 6-2. So that always brings out some of the comments. And it's, I every year I come out with my usual posting of, hey, this is Crabtree. It's math. It's fairly simple. It's not a complicated thing.
Yeah.
Folks can make it complicated, but the reality is win your records, play tough opponents, and it'll reward you in the end.
If there's one thing I've learned since I started doing this is that a lot of people don't like math and are
Yeah.
scared of math. It's, I mean, heel points is the same thing. It's people look at it as this really complicated thing, and it's really just, you can factor in the class, adjustments or whatever, but it's how many games did the teams you beat win, and how many games did the other team, how many times did that happen for the other team? And if you beat a team that won 10 games and your opponent beat teams that won 15 games, they're going to be higher than you in the heel points. That's just how it works.
Yeah, you could beat a team in Class A that won 5 games, and you may not get as many points as you would, say, if you beat a Class B team that won 10 or 11 games. Absolutely. I forget how long ago it was, but I know the football committee did try to utilize heel points for a 2-year spell, and I will say it was intimidating at first. My spreadsheet, my personal spreadsheet that I use, got a lot of work out, and I probably made more than my fair share of mistakes. But it was a unique, interesting look, because one of the comments that people often see when football is, well, it should matter what class that a team is in when you beat them. It should matter the amount of team, the quality of the wins that an opposing team got. Well, yeah, I mean, heel points has its definite advantages, like Crabtree has its definite advantages. Um, it's unique, but then again, every state has its own ranking system. We could
Yeah,
be complicated, like, say, Illinois, which actually has to use a preview show to unveil their playoff field because of how bizarre the alignment is. Or we could
that
go
must be
really
awesome.
simple. It's unique. I was doing some research once, just different formats, and I got stuck on reading about this, that Illinois will utilize a TV station for 30 minutes to unveil their entire playoff field because, what is it, 600 teams, 100 make the playoffs. They rank
Jeez.
them by wins, points awarded to teams for how many victories they get. The first X number, 64, 82, 100, however many it is, get ranked, and they all get sorted by playoffs in terms of their ranking. So a team could be the highest caliber one year just by virtue of their student enrollment, but then other schools could be doing better the next year, and they could be re-enrolled, and you don't have a set class. You're at the mercy of the size of the schools ahead of you with better schedules. It was crazy.
That's
And
awesome.
it's different, definitely different, to say the least. And when I looked around at a lot of these other ones, even if I go to our neighbors to the west in New Hampshire, theirs is, similar, kind of a little bit different, in terms of how they award points, how they rank things out. But at the end of the day, everybody's kind of come up with their own methodology. Everybody's like, well, we've used this because it makes sense. We like it. And, hey, who knows? Maybe one day Maine decides to go back to melee points, back in what they were using, I think, back in the 90s or whatnot.
What were those? I don't remember that.
I don't honestly know. I've tried
Okay.
looking back to get an idea of what they consisted of, how the methodology worked, but at some point, melee points were the ranking thing, and then somewhere between the 90s and 2000, the MPA decided to make the football change, or the football committee at the time made the change. As I'm sure you've probably seen, records in Maine is extremely tough to find via the internet on anything before the 2000s. So
Oh yeah.
trying to use Google archives to look into the Bangor Daily News and see if just pray that they've got some sort of available article that explains these are melee points. This is the chart. This isn't figure out how they spot things out just for, out of curiosity, because having a good working idea is never a bad thing.
Yeah.
It gives you it always gives good perspective on, what works, what doesn't work, what could be different, what could possibly be changed.
So there's not a Frank Spanky site for football. I don't know if you're familiar with
Um,
that.
I am not. You'd have to elaborate on that for me.
So the Frank Spanky site for basketball is a huge archive. It's like a Google website thing, and it's looks like it's like GeoCities style stuff. But it's got everything. It's got like the heel point standings all the way back until the beginning of time. And it's got a count of how many state titles everybody has and all the 1,000 point scores and stuff like that, going pretty far back.
I have not. I think right now my page is about accurate out to 2004. I would love to go further back. It's always going to kind of be one of those projects for a wet, rainy day.
Mm-hmm.
But mine does do the Crabtree calculations back to 2004. I know the BDN's got an archive fairly reliable to the 90s, and then it's kind of hit or miss from there out from the 80s and 70s. Obviously, they were the better newspaper in terms of how they came up with information back at the time. Plus, it's something that's readily available, which it's unfortunate the Press Herald cannot lay claim to. Press Herald,
Right.
Sun Journal, Kennebec Journal, Morning Sentinel sort of thing. But at least through the BDN, they did list Crabtree numbers, which was always helpful. They were willing to show the Pine Tree rankings, SMAA, LTC, Campbell, every three-letter acronym for another region or association.
And is it just a thing where they have you reached out to them? Do they have the archives, or is it just what you've been able to find
Just what
online?
I've been able to find online.
Okay. All right. So what if? Okay. So you talked about easy schedule. So I have a question about last year with OOB. They had a regular season that was just absolutely ridiculous, as you know, and they were beating people like 80-0. And you're just sort of, if you're not seeing the games in person and you're not, you just go, well, they're probably going to win the whole thing. And then they just got absolutely smoked in the title game. So is that a situation where one region is that much stronger? Like what happened there? I can't recall a situation where a team was that dominant, and then it would be like if the Celtics got swept and lost every game by 30 in the NBA finals this last year.
It's going to be something that I think will have questions going into the future, because no school has ever been in football that clearly dominating their regional schedule. You can put it into context, I guess. You could say, well, Marshwood had 600 points in a 12-game season, which is just more than any other team had ever scored within the context of how they played. You could look at Foxcroft Academy last year, which was also just as dominant.
Oh, they were
The
wagging,
one
yeah.
yeah. The one thing that I will say that maybe it might have skewered it is, if you look at the schedule Old Orchard Beach played, 8-man small school was done entirely within region. So it was your round robin schedule. So they
Mm-hmm.
were playing, in addition to some of the tougher schools in their region, Dirigo, Maranacook, they also had to play some of those other programs that are still kind of, feeling their oats, Trape Academy, you got Sacopee Valley, you've got Booth Bay, you've got Telstar. So out of there, you've got some of these schools that are kind of, still struggling, still kind of putting together their program. I remember how it all started out last year, Thursday game. Old Orchard Beach opened the season off playing against Trape Academy. Very first play, kickoff return, straight for a touchdown. Trape Academy, I think they punted on the next possession they got, and Old Orchard Beach went down, scored a touchdown on the second play of their drive. And by the time halftime rolled around, I think it was 52-0, and you could definitely tell that these guys were something special. They just
Yeah.
had that right sort of it factor. They had a strong, a strong group of coaches there that had a lot of experience in different aspects, and you also had, interesting thing is that they didn't exactly have a super strong senior group. Most of their
Hmm.
talent was at the sophomore and junior level, which is just unheard of.
Right.
And the buzzsaw that was them saw them go through their entire region really without much of a problem until they got to state, until they got up to Cameron Stadium to play Orono. And that was an interesting thing. I want to say that Bob had a very good schedule or a very good game plan for his Red Riots coming into the game. I want to say maybe the weather, maybe the old Bangor wind
Okay.
played a little bit of a factor with some of the passing. I think um, it was one of those things where kids on Orono just they didn't come in thinking, oh geez, we're playing the best in the state. We're already behind the eight ball. They came in not with that sort of mindset. Um, then again, you look at Orono's schedule. I think Orono may have had the tougher schedule, and I may catch some flack for that, but I'm willing to kind of stand behind that. You look at the kids from Stearns that came in; they were no slouches. You looked at Bucksport, tough team there as well. Dexter, they looked pretty good playing as well. So maybe it is a matter where Old Orchard Beach might have had a easier schedule, an easier time, and come state they may not have gotten tested in the ways that you would want to see a team get tested going into a championship game. It's tough to say, I guess. At the end of the day, it's maybe it's more for opinion based than anything, but that's kind of my take to it.
Is my memory remembering this correctly, was Pierce Walston the quarterback for Orono?
No, that would be Jack Brewer. He is
Okay.
one of the things that I've had conversations with Orno's coach on is when is it time to look at Jack in terms of his numbers that he's putting up, and he's putting up numbers that have him competing with one of Maine's best quarterbacks in some time in Ben Lucas
Okay.
at Coney,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's a conversation to be had that eventually Jack's gonna have he's going to put up numbers that might even rival Ben. And at what point do we give credence to 8-man football's statistics being on par with 11-man? Now, I'm
Right.
sure there's going to be some folks right there that hear me say that, and their eyes are going to roll into the back of their head, and they're going to start, the foam is going to come out of their mouth, and they're going to say, no, it's not the same. And you got to look at
I
it in terms of they're putting up numbers in a football game against opposing teams the same way anybody else would. It's a
it's
fair debate.
I mean, it's almost in a sense, looking at scoring before and after 3-point line, because it's right because you got that much more room to run
Mm-hmm.
around. So the scoring is definitely elevated, right?
Oh, of course, absolutely. Now, the difference, an 8-man that you don't see an 11-man is 8-man traditionally, you've only got your two levels of defense. You got your initial line, then you got your secondary, your
Mm-hmm.
linebackers slash secondary. You don't have the luxury of having extra guys playing back. So the onus is really on making those one-on-one tackles. You can't rely entirely upon gang tackling to kind of save the day at the line. So you blow a tackle, miss a tackle, kid just powers on through. It doesn't take much for that to immediately go the distance, and there's not much you can do about it.
Now, with 8-man, the BDN had an article a couple weeks ago. I'm sure you saw it about how they think people think the 8-man numbers are coming down. So I wanted to get your take on that. Like, are teams abandoning 8-man? Like, what's happening here?
I don't The 8-man is following a typical boom bust cycle that's common with anything new that you see. 8-man started out as kind of, an idea that was we need to have some sort of a variant that works beyond the 2-year experiment of Classy, which was a development league trying to keep 11-man football for schools that were struggling to put out 20, 25, 30 kids. It was a noble experiment. The downside is that just doesn't help, because if Booth Bay came in, I want to say they had 16, 17, 18 kids. It wasn't a whole lot.
Jeez.
Okay. So if they play that against another team that has just as many kids, well, you're only a couple injuries away from really being hamstrung. So it's not really working. 8-man came along. Naturally, Mainers are a very reluctant lot. So when something new comes in,
No.
yeah, I know. Some people, I think they kind of said, when they took pictures, they might have thought their soul got stolen. So there was the initial field of 10 that gave it a legitimate chance, that said, we want to be on the ground. I look at Dean Plant for Old Orchard Beach, was one of the, he was one of the first, tent posts for trying to champion 8-man in a state that it was a completely alien focus to the next year. You saw more and more schools flock on board, not just the smaller schools, but some of the larger schools that were also kind of struggling. They looked at it and said, hey, that could be us too. You've got your Camden Hills as an example. They kind of made the move, realizing, look, our numbers just aren't getting better. We need to have something that lets us focus it. Early on, there was two different mindsets of what 8-man was going to be and what they wanted it to be. One was a place for your smaller schools in Maine that just aren't getting the numbers to safely compete in 11-man against those who could. It's a fair enough
Sure.
start. Then you've got these other larger schools that needed a place to go while they rebuilt themselves and started moving up. The narrative for some was that was the whole purpose of 8-man, was just as a way to develop and build and reestablish before going back to 11-man. And then there was those that said, look, that's not what it is. That's not what it is. That's not what it's intended to. Maine, I've always said Maine is a unique state in that regard. It's unique compared to the rest of the country that plays 8-man. When you go out to the Midwest, out to the mountains, they play football out there, and there is no competing fall sport. Soccer does not exist in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. All these other states that have 8-man, they don't have soccer competing for bodies the way they do out in Maine, or the way that we
Like
do
because
here.
it's because no one's playing soccer, or because soccer is like in the spring.
For some states, soccer is in the spring, but for others, spring is your baseball, your track and field, your traditional track and those
Hmm.
traditional sports as it's viewed. So out there, soccer just isn't it. Everybody goes out for football. I look back to where I came from, where a school the size of Stearns, which is the smallest football playing school in Maine, has, what is it, 100 and 170, 180 kid enrollment,
Something
something to
something
that
like
like
that.
that. And you go out to the Midwest, and that would be an 11-man school, because they don't have soccer to compete for bodies. They can get 30 kids out there, 30, maybe 40 kids, and it's no big deal. Out here in Maine, you've got soccer competing for it. Soccer is, for much of the state, king. It's the reality, and it makes things very difficult, I think, to try to say that enrollment is the sole be all, end all be all, because that should be your reliable indicator. Well, take your boys enrollment from 9 through 12, figure out a way to cut off maybe a third, two
Hmm.
fifths out of that, and that's what you've got left for your football. So it's unique aspect where, Maine kind of has this view that it's only for small schools, because that's what the rest of the country does. But yet, if you've got a Morse, Mount Ararat, Camden Hills, Waterville, Mount Desert Island, some of these bigger schools, well, they shouldn't be playing. Well, you're ignoring the fact that there's other circumstances coming in that doesn't make it easy for boys, for the enrollment, whether it's, the boys, girls, side that wants to play it or not.
Yeah.
It's it's unique. It's unique, I guess, to say the least. And through all my research that I've done, the two most recent states that played eight man, that instituted 8-man prior to Maine, Michigan and New York. New York ended up being the one that came out with a firm enrollment number that said we do not want any school below 240, 270. For some reason, I'm thinking those two numbers, but they said anything below those or above those two thresholds, you're off to 11-man. Now, I don't
Hmm.
know how prevalent soccer is in New York. I want to say I think lacrosse holds a tough hold on some of the enrollment.
Lacrosse is big in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say the same thing for Michigan as well. I think Michigan's a big lacrosse school as well, or lacrosse state. So they've got some of that, but unlike Maine, Maine is just unique like that. We're one of the few states that doesn't have a ceiling threshold for 8-man. You're either, if you're above it, you play 11. If you're below it, you're considered safe. And I know it's been a debate, and I know I'm kind of getting a little long-winded, but it's a very unique answer. It's an answer unique to Maine in terms of how nascent the variant is to Maine, but also how there's not really a consensus of what warrants a school being an 8-man and whether schools should be kicked out of 8-man for
I
whatever
almost
reason.
I almost wonder if we should have a formula where it's like your enrollment divided by the number of uh, sports you offer in that season. So like, because if you got like winter, if you've got hockey or you don't have hockey, that's gonna have a pretty big impact on your available pool of talent for basketball. If you've got competitive cheerleading, that's gonna impact your girls basketball program because those are some kids with some long arms and long legs who, are at least depth to your program. And, if a school doesn't have soccer, or if it doesn't have field hockey, or it doesn't have lacrosse, that's more kids for the other sports.
It's it's not an easy thing to answer there, and I think the idea of the, dare I say it, the MPA and its one solution fits all approach just doesn't work here.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and who knows, maybe there is no answer. As maddening as that might be to some people out there that think there's got to be an answer, there's got to be a solution, there's got to be a rigid formula that works for everything. Maybe there is no solution, and maybe at the end of the day, folks got to understand that, does it really matter? Can we does it really require that to be in place? Can we
Yeah.
not just say, live and let live in that case?
You
That might
know,
be a tough thing
fact,
for folks to comprehend, but maybe that's what it is. And to get back to your question, I don't believe that 8-man is on the way out.
okay.
I think it's following this, that boom bust cycle. We're now at a point where some of these schools feel that after 1 or 2 years, they're in a better position. They've got the numbers there. They've got a coaching staff that is more familiar with 11-man. That's what they feel is comfortable. That was a stated goal. I feel like Matt Knockhook Academy, Brad Bishop's been very vocal about where he would like to see his program return to. Marana Cook, Jordan DeMillo came in when they made the move down to 8-man, and that was kind of like, hey, I'm here to this is what I want to do. This is what I'm feeling comfortable about. And then they had a coaching shift. I think it's Skip Bessie that went there. At least I hope it is. Sometimes it's tough to remember some of the moving and shaking, but I know, they had their coaching change, and that was one of the things, saying, hey, I really want to bring these guys back to 11-man. Mountain Valley, got their history through the 80s, 90s, 2000s of being the tough mountain school. Going down to 8-man, I think was a big learning adjustment for a lot of their citizens. And now that they're back in 11-man, where I think a lot of people feel comfortable, hopefully it works for them. Um, Brunswick, Brunswick had that. Oh, I really,
Yeah, that was the whole thing.
yeah,
It's
it's unfortunate a lot of the way around that what happened to the coaching staff, what happened for the players, the hazing, all that sort of thing. There's a lot of different, layers to that onion to peel back, but basically they've been trying to build themselves back from the ground up in the hardest way possible. And I
Sure.
think for them, they identified themselves, hey, we're an 11-man community, we always have, that's our goal. 8-man was to make sure that we can say, hey, we still want to play football. So to say that people are leaving 8-man, I think is bit a bit of a bizarre take, because that still doesn't account for the 20, what is it, it's 9, 7, and 8, so that's 26 programs out there that have 26 different positions that they're in. None of them are unique, or none of them are shared by the other. So I
Right.
feel that it's not exactly correct to say that it's slipping. And I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear the rationale behind the article and the decision that was made to go in that direction, because I don't believe that's the case. But hey, that's the writer's prerogative. If that's what he feels, who am I to say? I have my own opinion. He has his opinion. So I can respect, him using his platform, coming up with that article to say what it is. I disagree, but that's what makes this the state and our sporting culture great.
And it's Sam wrote that, Sam Caulfield, and he's new, so I mean that could be a factor. One question I had about 8-man is: are there schools that just prefer 8-man, that they were like, that would say even if we had the numbers to go 11-man, we like this variant of the sport more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The first example I'm going to bring up is Dean Plant over at Old Orchard Beach. He's championed 8-man from day one. He I've gotten countless videos of him. As a matter of fact, I was there for the very first ever 8-man game played, where he even said, this is something that's not going away. It's only going to get bigger. It's great for our program, and it's going to be great for the state and those that need it. Um, now granted, that's on the very small side of the structure, where side of the enrollment structure in the state. I look then at a place like Morse, over in Bath. I had a chance to talk to head coach Jason Darling, and I said, your program's looking pretty big. Where do you I said, where do you see yourself going forward in the future? And he said, the thing is, you can look at our sideline and you can see a lot of kids, but you don't see the story of it. You don't see, who do we got coming in at the different skill positions? Who do we got that's capable? He mentioned having a conversation with some of his players, and they said, coach, we don't have the enough linemen, the quality of linemen to even come in. We love this version, we love 8-man football. We like the athleticism. We love the speed of the game. We love that it's not entirely reliant upon 3 yards and a cloud of dust. Let's kids have fun. Let's kids be athletes. You know, does
Are
it
there fewer
does
injuries in 8-man?
it um I think it's just as many as 11-man. I think
Okay.
maybe you'll see more running based injuries than, say, in 11-man, where you can have the very real risk of, you know, the crush hurting, wrecking legs, wrecking, Achilles tendons. I'm thinking lower body injuries when I come up with some
Mm-hmm.
of these, but you get a scrum pile and you get those tackles and you just get kids falling over each other. You're going to have the possibility of injuries. Maybe on scale you might see a little bit more on 11-man, but I don't think it's anything that anybody's come out saying 8-man is inherently safe because 6 fewer kids.
Okay.
I wouldn't go out and say something like that.
All right. I'm gonna have you go, if you don't mind. I'm gonna have you go through the regions and give me like the top two ish. Give me the contenders in each region,
Okay,
if you
so
don't. So let's start with you want to start with 8-man since we're in 8-man right now. So
sure.
large school, that's large school north, which is really small. That's like 4 schools, right?
Actually, I'm hoping the football bulletin can be updated, because I
See, that
have
was my
gotten
source.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the football bulletin does not appear to be updated with the way things are currently. I have gotten confirmation 8-man large is just going to be one table. I I
Oh,
saw
it's
the
just
football,
so no north and south.
no north and south single
Oh,
table. I
you're
was
hearing it first
confused.
here.
I was confused initially as well, and then I reached out to a couple of the ADs that are involved in 8-man, both at the large school and the small school level, and I said, "Hey, football bulletin saying this. I need confirmation." And they said it's going to be single table, top six get in, first two teams going to buy.
Okay.
So a little bit different. It's going to be kind of like the way Class A was a couple years ago, where there
Hmm.
wasn't really enough to have to justify having a north and south region. So they agreed just to put them in a single table format.
Which is the thing they couldn't convince him to do for Double A for basketball, but we digress. So, who are our contenders in 8-man large?
I've heard nothing but great things about the number of seniors that are coming back to Mount Desert Island. They were your defending state 8-man large school champions. They had probably one of the best all around players you could see in Spence Lorendo, senior. Amazing kid out there. He graduated. You would think losing somebody like him in 8-man would leave a gaping hole for the rest of the team, but I think Mark Shields has done a great job in his, coming back to the team, getting them basically really focused on having a cohesive group effort. I don't If I sat down and looked at the rosters, maybe I might recognize a few kids that I could say, yeah, I remember him last year. He's coming in as a senior. I think that it's just the volume of seniors they've got coming in that's just going to make them a dog against every one of their opponents. After them, you've got, Camden Hills last year was the Cinderella story for 8-man large, in my opinion. After all the years and years that they have just mightily struggled trying to put together a solid program, trying to keep, kids in the Rockport area from coming in to play football, keeping them in there, they go undefeated. First time in program history. So, and they did it not exactly with a offense that would blow everybody away. Quite the opposite. They had probably one of the best defenses you would find in 8-man football,
Hmm.
which is interesting because you don't generally think of defense in 8-man,
Right.
but defense 8-man is very much a quick variation of 11-man. You need to be quick because if you can use your speed, you end up having ways that you can reduce the amount of time that a quarterback has on the ball trying to look for people, and you can reduce the amount of distance that a receiver can, get himself open. And Windjammers were able to do that, folks. They did a phenomenal job. They got a little bit tripped up at the end of the season, but it's learning curves, and I think they will be another such team that will be competing. Then there's my personal favorite, Mount Ararat. I love what Frank True has done in Topsom for the Eagles over there. My opinion, godfather of the 8-man program for the large schools. He's been around from day one. His team won the very first ever 8-man state championship in Maine. And he does that in a large school that has had a traditional time of struggling to get kids out for football. So he's got a school of 800 some kids, but he's only putting together a football team in the upper to mid to upper 20s. But they find the caliber of players and the system that they have that works. So, in my opinion, one of those three teams, and that's no slight to Greeley. Greeley is another one of those programs. They're a Phoenix program that kind of rose from the ashes of having to kind of shut down due to lack of numbers. They co-opted with Falmouth, and then eventually they said, no, we want to represent ourselves. Co-op doesn't work for everybody. They wanted to
Right.
represent the school, themselves, their family, and their town. Hats off to them. They struggled the first year. Caleb King, was kind of building them from the ground up, and then last year they went on one heck of a run at the end of the season. Um, they're another group that I think is going to be a tough fight. But when I look at it, those Camden, Mount Desert Island, Mount Ararat, that'd probably be my pick for the three, kind of competing for that the upper third of the 8-man large.
All right. So let's go 8-man small. Who do you like? There's the OOB and Orono again.
Uh, Nobody is going to like to hear this, but it's going to be a narrative that's going to be going through the next 12 or next 11 weeks for 8 man, and that's going to be, can Orono and Old Orchard Beach face off for a third time? I don't remember off the top of my head if it's ever been done in high school football in Maine, if there's ever been three teams that have played over 3 separate years for the state championship. But I think that's what everybody's going to be looking at, is saying, Jack Brewer and Orono, is this his year? They're also going to be looking at Old Orchard Beach, and with they graduated a few kids, maybe not all of them, but is this going to be the year that anybody else can push them aside? And when I look at overall, I think there's going to be a lot of I think Orono and the North might face some challenges that I don't think the South may have. Losing Dirigo, losing Marana Cook in 8 man South just kind of changes the dynamic there. But I think we'll see Old Orchard Beach OOB, or Orono Old Orchard Beach 3 come November.
I mean, that'd be pretty cool. All right, so let's go to
Just
jump up to
just don't
A.
just don't ask me who do I think is going to win, because it's somebody's going to have to take that rubber match. I don't know who. Nobody would have figured that Orono would have won last year except for the Orono community.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. It's not anything I'd be willing to wager money on in Vegas. That's for sure.
All right, so let's go to A North. Who do you like in A North?
A North, I start off with Portland. Sean Green, probably one of the best young minds you're seeing coming into football in Maine. Goes to Cape Elizabeth, takes a Cape Elizabeth team that was good, but just wasn't. They weren't at that point where they could ever secure the mountaintop. Aaron
Hmm.
Filio, great guy. He was there, Cape Elizabeth, kind of, building him up through the tough years, through the Rivals movie, showcased what he had done there. Just his teams, just they could get there, but just didn't have just enough to get above it. Sean came in and he was able to take that Cape Elizabeth team, run the table, and won them in. He goes out to Portland, where he's got a great name for himself, brings over a lot of good staff that he had there, and he's got a strong Portland contingent. They've always been there. He's got a good playbook. He's got a good game plan that he can come in. And when you look at A North, nothing against the other schools. I just don't think anybody is there at the Portland level. And that's no knock on, say, Wyndham. Wyndham looks very competitive from what I've been told. Oxford Hills has a new coach. Mark Soren's out after taking that program on one of the longest builds you're ever going to see, from, struggles, bottom of the standings, all the way up to state championships. And my hat off to him. Anybody wants to see how to build a program from the bottom all the way to the very top needs to look at that long, 10, 15-year tenure that the Vikings have gone on over the years. But unfortunately, I don't see, it's tough to see anybody else kind of being there with Portland right now.
Okay, so in the South, A South, who do you like?
Thornton Academy all day long.
All right.
This is going to be a team that maybe could be one of their best ones, maybe at least their best one in terms of Coach Kevin Kiesel's time, and that's
Okay,
that's saying a lot. They've
that's a
certainly
high
had a lot of
standard.
great ones. Yeah, absolutely. But in Saco, for the Golden Trojans, high standards is the standard. They
Yeah.
they have a youth development program that is second to none across the state, and it's in a city that's not really the biggest in there, but they find ways to get buy-ins from everybody, to where the point is you don't need to focus on ever having to deal with the question of playing a sophomore, putting him on the varsity team as a starter through sheer necessity, like you might see in some other places.
Sure.
That just goes to show how strong Thornton is. And they're going to have some names out there that could be Fitzpatrick contenders at the end of the season.
Okay. So B North.
B North is the buzzsaw that is it's the meat grinder. It's a great region to watch. I always love watching, the names, the schools that come through it because it's not a region where you can usually find one dedicated team that just runs the table. There is always that competing factor. There's always you've got Lawrence. Lawrence started out a little bit slow last year, and basically once things get cold, Hersum's offense is designed to hurt with every hit they make and every time they run through the line. Mesalonsky had a new coach that was coming in. You know, New quarterback as well. Fly Eagles fly was their mantra, and boy did it ever work for a program that really has kind of struggled since the Dexter brothers were around, and they've been on the build. Coney BL Lippert loves that pass game that they have out there, and they were able to fly that to some pretty lofty heights last year. The problem is with B North, it is such a tough region to forecast a champion coming out of here. Some years it's clear cut, other times you're going to see a Lawrence that comes from the bottom of the pack and rushes to the very top. So the you know, the to the uninitiated, I'd probably say you'd look at Lawrence as being that team that's going to come in. They've got a heck of a returning running back as a senior. Was it Colton? I think Colton, not Rivers, but forget what the kid's name is. But he's going to be one of those kids. I'm going to probably look at my sheet and I'm going to see exactly what it is. But he's going to be one of those that's going to be the anchor point for these Bulldogs.
Okay.
I've also heard Coney's looking really strong with their pass attack. They've got a run game that they may be able to kind of push into play as well. So who knows? But it's going to be exciting.
Is it a little bit like basketball where B North is just a juggernaut and there's like four schools who make a really good case for?
I wouldn't say that any one of those schools is just outright dominating, but in terms of their own region, it's those are forced. You're going to have schools here that are just going to be, Skowhegan is a great example. A couple of years ago, who would have guessed that Skowhegan on the build that they were at would do what they did? Then came the next year and they completely fell. They fell right off the mountain. Then that's I think the great thing about B North is you don't necessarily have the sustained dominance, but you're at least going to see some new teams in the mix as well.
Okay.
Mesalonsky, I think, was the nice the nice story coming into last year.
All right. So B South.
B South it's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of folks kind of looked at it. Kennebunk was going to kind of lead the way. Folks generally think Marshwood is going to be at the pack because of what Alex Rotzko has been building up over the years. I think Kennebunk's got the sort of kids. Coach Knoll has got, he's got a good program that he's building in there. Taking over the reins. I think they've got to be the team to beat. One of the programs that, of course, you got to watch out for. Got to watch out for Chevrolet. Skip Capone was given the reins over there. Who's, if you've been unless you've been in Iraq, or living under a rock, I should say. Everybody who has anything to do with football is going to know Skip's, his impact on the state.
Sure.
And hats off to him getting this job. He's got the sort, there was a good team last year and people would think of Chevrolet, they wouldn't necessarily think of a ground and pound team. And that's exactly what you're going to get out of these guys. And I think that's Skip's kind of team. And it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with with the team that he's got. They could very well be that contender to Kennebunk that was going to make for some compelling races towards the very end of the season and then going into the playoffs.
All right. So now C North.
C North was dominated last year by Oceanside. Sam
Right.
Weiss, who I'm going to give a shout out to, is going to be one of the most innovative minds in football that you're going to find anywhere.
Hmm.
Anywhere. He's doing stuff with his team that is just very unconventional for the football atmosphere, for the football landscape. Last year, he had the Cohen brothers, he had Sargent out there. They had some great pieces that were just lighting up the scoreboard all year long. They graduated a little bit of that, but now Rockland's giving that team, they're getting the sort of football buyout, something they haven't had in a long, long time. And I think, they would have to automatically be in that competing conversation. Not so much because they are the defending champions, but because they've got a rebuild going on as well, or reload, dare I say.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a
Yeah.
reload going on right now that I think it just automatically is going to warrant respect. The other one that I think you need to watch out for is Herman. After Kyle Gallant's years of building up that team, I think he's finally got the collection, the cast of characters, the cast of talent out there that this could be the year that the Hawks start pushing for the top of the region. And it's kind of different. 2 years ago, Madomic Valley, one of the more successful new, not expansion, but new programs coming in, finally reached their mountaintop. They finally reached the state championship in football. Last year was Oceanside, who hadn't been to a state championship game since, the football used to be split in Class C into the North and South state championships with no unified champion. I think that was the last time Rockland ever had
Yes,
anybody
that would have
say.
been Rockland.
Yeah, and that was back, well, years and years before the move. Obviously, years before the Georges Valley Rockland merger that created the school here. But I think with what you're getting, Herman's going to be one of those schools that if they aren't, they could be very well pushing Oceanside, and who knows, maybe we could see an upset. I've heard a lot of good things about the Hawks this year, and much, with respect to Oceanside, you can never ever write anybody off immediately from day one. Hope springs eternal, coming into the season.
All right, so C South, is it just Leavitt? Did we just say Leavitt?
I think, yeah, it's gonna be a tough one. Brunswick's on their rebuild. This is their first year back in 11-man. When you're an 8-man, you don't an 8-man, you're luck. Good teams usually have two quality offensive players. That's what I've always kind of said. If
Okay.
you've got two quality guys, quarterback and a running back, two running backs, usually you're going to be one of the top contenders. Once you get into the 11-man version, you need to have, to be a tough team, you either need to have a running game that's going to knock everybody on their butts, or you need to have that sort of diversified offense to where you can score at will by pass or run.
Mm-hmm.
Brunswick's going to have some learning curves coming into the season. Cape Elizabeth, they've been kind of on the struggle ever since Sean Green made that move to Portland. We'll see what's going to come from them. Freiburg Academy, they've certainly got some big shoes to fill coming into last year. Will they be just as competitive as last year for them? They didn't really have any world beaters coming into that season, so that's going to be kind of a tough thing for them. And York's kind of been up and down a little bit. When I look at those four schools in comparison to Leavitt is just that much more higher. I
Sure.
hope those other four schools can prove me wrong, but it's tough to kind of immediately look at Leavitt and say, yeah, somebody else is going to be ahead of them on the pecking order from day one.
All right, so D North.
D North it's a unique region. When they did the realignment last year, quite a number of the schools that were populating that region came down from C South, or C North, I mean, and let's be honest, they were kind of near the bottom of their pecking orders down there. So it kind of
Mm-hmm.
made for a very bottom heavy region. And I'm going to probably anger a lot of people with that opinion. Hey, it's my own. Opinions are like certain parts of the anatomy. We all know
Sure.
that one. I want to say though, Foxcroft Academy, for how strong they were last year, had a big senior group, and I think they're gonna fall down a little bit. How much? I don't know. It's going to depend on whether the rest of the region is going to be kind of pushing upwards. Winslow had a really good exhibition game. When I was looking at some of the scores that came in, my jaw kind of dropped when I saw what they were able to put up on Poland last night or yesterday.
Hmm.
So hats off to them. We'll see what they can come from there. Um, Matt Nawcook Academy, another program on the move up from 8-man to 11. We'll see what they've got out there. Maine Central Institute, struggles. They had a tough run last year. We'll see where they can rebound. Madison's kind of had tough luck for the last couple of years. We'll see what they can build up. Same thing can be said for Belfast. I think they had a nice positive run towards the end of the season, getting to where they were at. John Bapst, is kind of the surprising, piece of everything. They were kind of that, yeah, we're second to Foxcroft Academy, but don't you deny us. We're going to be, right there to the very end, and we'll see what, can John Bapst, that'll be kind of a good storyline is can they build upon their 6-2 run last year, or are they going to kind of, is the rest of the pack going to catch up to them? And I think at the end of the day, you got to start off with Foxcroft Academy. Danny White is, without a doubt, top mind in football, among other top minds. He's got, the community buyout, buy-in, the program that the Ponies got makes them one of those sort of showcases. If you needed to look at Maine's high school football landscape and you said these are the 5 programs we want to kind of show off to the rest of the country, saying
Hmm.
this is what Maine high school football makes us so great, you got to go up to Dover Foxcroft and talk about the Ponies. And
Yeah, I saw
that's
them
a
last
lot
year, and
of
they were really impressive.
yeah, that's all, and that's it's well deserved, but it's well earned. Praise to them.
All right, so D South.
D South has always been it's been one of those meat grind them up. Traditionally, it's, kind of been that central Maine, trio power base of Winthrop, Monmouth, Halldale, Oak Hill, and Lisbon. They've always kind of been there. Now you've got the introduction of Dirigo, Maranacook, and Mountain Valley. Wells kind of came from the bottom of the pack to kind of make that late season run and ended up pulling off one of the most improbable victories in a state championship game that you will ever see. They come into halftime losing to Foxcroft Academy 21-0. And I remember looking at the updates and I kind of was saying out loud to the media peers in Portland at the time, I said, there's no way Wells can come back. There's no way Wells could possibly beat out the Ponies. I think, this is going to finally be the year the Ponies, they get another state championship. And Tim Roach made me eat my words. I remember messaging him saying, I didn't believe in you. I didn't believe in your program, and your kids pulled off one of the gutsiest victories you're going to find. They converted every one of their turnovers into points, and they had, it was a quote that I'm always going to remember of, I can't exactly repeat it on some, certain areas, but let's just say that the kids had no doubt in my mind. They were not going for the point after try. They wanted the 2. They wanted the victory. And for them to get that touchdown into the end zone is, you know, it's not the way you would traditionally think a Wells team would win a state championship, but Tim loves throwing these wrinkles at you. He is, he's a senior elder statesman to the Maine in terms of coaching, and he just proved that, just when you think you got him figured out, he does something new and he gets you going on that one. So I like him. I think you immediately got to look at him, but there's another program that is on the build, and that's your Ramblers out of Winthrop. I'm hearing some amazing things about the amount of kids they've got there. They've got that great artificial turf rebuild at Maxwell Field, or what is it, Charlie's place at Maxwell Field. They got some sponsorship going on out there, so I think they might be one of those kind of programs you immediately got to look at the end of the season saying this could be the Ramblers year finally, after
Okay.
decades of the struggles. I think going back to Lee St. Hilaire when he was his unfortunate story. I think you go back to that point of the last time the Ramblers were state champions, if memory serves me correctly, and I think this is going to be their year.
Okay. You've now got bulletin board material for half the state. So coaches
Well,
everywhere are thanking you.
those coaches are going to love me. And then there's going to be a whole lot of other people, other communities, teams that I'm going to have to add to my I'm biased against list. So when you've been around
You also have a list. I have the same list.
after a while, eventually you can just start saying, all right, I've been biased to both regions. I've been biased to the large schools, to the small schools. I've been biased to countless schools. I've been biased against a coach. I've been biased against a fan base. After a while, you just kind of say, all right, just whatever it takes, folks, whatever helps
Yeah.
you sleep soundly.
When I was first doing this and I was still anonymous, because I'm a big Madomic Valley guy, one of the Madomic kids was complaining to my brother, who was the coach. He's like, "Oh, that site. He doesn't know anything about us. He doesn't like us at all." My brother's like, "Yeah, no.
And
He's
I
been to
will
your
admit,
games."
And I will admit, one of the things, I mean, I've like you, I've kind of kept a largely anonymous presence to my page. My opinion to that being is that this page isn't about me. This page
Right.
is about, the great communities of this great state of Maine that have done, that live the football Americana tradition that you see across the country. It's not me that is, I'm not trying to showcase myself. I'm trying to showcase to the both to the state and to the world. Just I think Maine's football is that great, and that's not me being corny.
Right.
One of the things that I've learned since I've moved to the state, yes, I'm one of those people from away, is I
Oh,
use
from
yeah, I
away,
know.
a tourist.
More or less a tourist, although I'm starting to get to the point where I've lived in Maine over half my adult life. So one of the things I have learned though is that using football for me has been that thing that's helped me learn about the state of Maine. Coming in, it's a big state. It's tough to get a feel for it when you're starting off. And
Hmm.
I was able to use football to kind of get around to different places and learn a lot of different things. And that's it's helped me learn things about here that I never would have seen or never would have known, and it's also helped me see things that maybe as a transplant or from away that I never would have realized about it. And I think it's been great, and I've been able to use that football kind of as a personal bridge. So for that, it's my own personal journey, and that's why I don't want to use my personal journey as the way to put myself out in front of the page. So whenever I've done what I've done, I've always tried to keep my name in general away from it. The problem, of course, with keeping your name anonymous is that always it invites, the kind of, opinions of, well, it must just be somebody who loves the opposing team, or he
Yeah.
must come from the north, or he must come from the south, or he must be in the west, or he must, be for this school, because surely nobody could talk about our school like that. It's like, come on, folks. It's don't take
People get
yourself
really
that
bent out of
seriously.
shape with this stuff sometimes. It's a little
Yeah,
crazy.
they can. It's but I'd like to think that you know from the perspective I try to look at for other states, I'd like to think that there's that same sort of opinion elsewhere. So at the end of the
Oh
day,
yeah.
what we see in Maine isn't exactly unique to Maine, even though some folks may think it is. At the end of the day, it's the same sort of community pride that everybody has, that they want to see good things written about their area.
Sure. So I have one more question for you. Speaking of people getting bent out of shape or things people get bent out of shape about, what if you had to pick one coach to be selected to run for vice president of the United States? Who would it be?
um oh wow. See, that's a tough one because I can already think of a few great coaches. And one of the things about being a coach is that it's such a multifaceted role. You have to be a consensus builder, you got to be a planner, you got to be a tacticianer. You got to be a person that is willing to work across multiple parties for the best possible thing.
Hmm.
For starters, I would look at the only existing head coach right now who spent time in Augusta, and that would be Wells's Tim Roach. I may not necessarily see all of his political opinions, but he's got the experience, and he is beloved in that community. He's got a lot of support across the state of Maine. In my opinion, if I had to run And boy, would that be an interesting trip. I would probably, if I had to look at anybody on the face of it, I would probably start with him. Whether he would take it or not, that would be a completely different story.
Right.
But I respect the man that much that I would say, look, we may not be on the same side of the political divide, but I know with you, you will do what's right. You will do what's right for your constituents, whether it's for, locally or whether it's on a nationwide level. And that's no disrespect to other coaches, by the way. There are other guys that I love chatting with, that I love getting along with. But if I had to, that'd be my starting point.
Very cool. All right, so you've got a preview coming out. You mentioned off air. How can people find that? How can people go plug the site?
All right. So my preview show will be coming out Sunday evening. It'll be the first of my 13 weekend rewinds that you'll see on there. They can be found in one of two ways. If you're on social media, I am a heavy Facebook proponent. You can come out to facebook.com and go to Maine High School Football. Be careful. There's a lot of scammers out there. Look for my logo. Look for the site plugging my website, which is www.mainhighschoolfootball.com, and that's where you can find me on the internet.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this. It's a great site, and when I had started doing football, first like so many people were like, "Oh, you got to go over here." Andrew's the guy. He knows where all the bodies are buried.
Well, I know what was, for some cases, yes. Other cases, I only know what the implement was, and that's what I will say if I go into court.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for doing this, and enjoy the season.
Pleasure talking to you, Lucas. You have a great night.
All right. You too. Okay, that'll be our show. Thanks again to Andrew Hart for joining me. Fantastic conversation with him. MaineHighSchoolFootball.com is the website. Everything you would need to know about Maine High School football, you can find it there. Let's read it out. This has been a production of MaineBasketballRankings.com, your source for the most comprehensive coverage of Maine high school basketball from Ashland to York and everywhere in between. This podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts and a bunch of places you don't. If you enjoy it, please leave a nice review because it does help out with algorithms. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, basketball dad nerd Lucas McNelly. Have a great day.